After developing two highly successful and critically acclaimed 3D platforming titles for the PS2, Insomniac had the daunting task of fulfilling fans' expectations by creating a threequel that was just as good if not better than both its predecessors combined, with those being the first Ratchet & Clank game and its sequel, Qwark Commando. But how could they follow up the second game when it's cited as not only a great game, but also a perfect sequel? Well, Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal is the third entry in the series and serves as a direct follow-up to Qwark Commando. This time around, our duo has to stop the maniacal Dr. Nefarious from turning every single living being in the Solana galaxy into robots. On their journey, they're joined by the Galactic Rangers, who are led by Captain Sasha of the Starship Phoenix, as well as a couple of returning characters such as Al, Helga, and Skidman Marks. Captain Qwark also makes a return, although he isn't as likable as he was in the previous games in my opinion, but I'll get into that in further detail as well as the rest of the story later on. Up Your Arsenal still follows the same basic core gameplay as its predecessors. You know, traveling to different planets and earning bolts from killing enemies, and using those bolts to buy lots of cool weapons, and there are a lot of great new weapons that are included here, such as the Rift Inducer, a gun that fires a black hole that sucks up every enemy around it, and you can create a huge black hole by shooting out multiple small ones in the same spot, which is so cool. Another cool weapon feature here is the Spitting Hydra, which shoots out powerful bursts of electricity at enemies, and by holding down the fire button, it can target up to 7 enemies at once when it's fully upgraded. There's also the Plasma Whip, a melee weapon that functions very similarly to Ratchet's Wrench, with the only differences being that it has a limited amount of ammo and does more damage. Fun fact, the Plasma Whip was actually inspired by the weapon that Ivy uses in Soul Calibur.
I like that.
Slunk Magneto returns once again, and it's through him that you're able to get some old weapons from the previous game for free, such as the Bouncer, Lava Gun, Minotaur Glove, and Plasma Coil if you have a save file for Qwark Commando. You can also get a discount on all your weapons through the Gadgetron vendor if you have a save file for the first game, but I can't get a discount even though the game knows that I have a save file for Ratchet 1, so yeah, that sucks. In the previous game, you could only level up a weapon twice, once with a base weapon and once again with a mega weapon. Now you're able to level up weapons 5 times, up to a max level of V5. But once you beat the game, you can buy mega versions of all the weapons you own and can further increase that power by an additional 3 levels, with V8 being the absolute max level for all weapons. Weapon mods return but automatically become a part of each and every weapon, unlike the previous game where you had to buy them. This means that some weapons will gain specific mods, such as the lock-on mod, or the acid mod, or even the shock mod as they evolve. The weapon leveling system this time around is really neat, all things considered. My only gripe is that some of the weapons are just recycled versions of older ones. Take the Nitro Launcher for example. It's a grenade launcher just like the Gravity Bomb from Qwark Commando, and has no special or unique abilities that set it apart from it, which makes me wonder why it was included here to begin with. The Hollow Shield Glove is another new weapon that's included here, and it's basically a glove that shoots out these little force fields that shield you from enemies' attacks. But there was already a weapon that did that much better in the previous game, and that same weapon was brought back, courtesy of Slunk Magneto, so there's really no point in buying it. I don't think having old weapons disguised as new ones is a bad idea in some cases, as the Shock Blaster is a shotgun-like weapon just like the Blitz Gun. But what sets it apart from the Blitz Gun is that you can charge up a really powerful blast at the cost of more ammo that'll tear through multiple enemies at once, which is really cool. The gadgets included here are great as well for the most part, except for some such as the Hacker, which is probably the worst hacking / puzzle solving gadget in the whole entire series. Using this thing is very repetitive real quick, because all you're doing is shooting and collecting these red and green dots, which wouldn't be as bad if you didn't have to do it so many times, but hacking through 3, sometimes up to 4 different terminals back to back really slows down the pacing of the levels that they're included in. The Terror Guise is another gadget that's pretty lackluster in my opinion. It basically allows you to disguise yourself as a Terranoid, this game's main antagonistic force, which isn't bad in itself, but when using it you have to engage in these little rhythm-based mini-games in order to progress through certain parts of a level, and that's not bad in itself, it just brings the pace to an absolute halt. There still are some good gadgets featured here, such as the Hyper Shot and Refractor, along with the Warp Pad. What's cool about the Hyper Shot is that it's a combination of the Swing Shot and Dynamo, with it allowing you to swing through levels and also activate these Dynamo platforms, and you don't have to manually equip it all the time like the Swing Shot from the previous 2 games. Instead, it'll automatically equip whenever you're near a Hypershot target or Dynamo trigger. The Refractor is another cool gadget that you'll use very often. It allows you to redirect laser beams by generating a laser force field around you, and can also be used as a weapon whenever there are enemies around. The Warp Pad allows you to teleport between 2 set points within a level, but just like the Hypnomatic from Qwark Commando, it's so underutilized. I've played through this game several times and can only remember using it once, and that was in the level where you go to Qwark's hideout. And that's such a shame because it seems like a cool gadget that would come in handy on many of the planets you explore. And speaking of planets, one of this game's biggest weaknesses in my opinion is the level design. The levels featured here this time around are extremely linear and quite frankly, dull. Most of these levels are limited to one path forward and maybe a little secret area off to the side somewhere. This wouldn't be bad if this were any other video game, but this is Ratchet & Clank we're talking about here, a franchise that's known for its semi-linear space exploration. So having each planet be limited to one path instead of 2 or 3 like before makes them feel very small and quite barren. But just because the levels are linear doesn't mean they aren't good at all. There are still plenty of good levels featured here. Florana is a nice lush forest planet that you visit at the start of your journey where you have to fight against these hostile tribesmen and other creatures, and it also ends off with you having to navigate your way through this fun yet very deadly obstacle course. Planet Dex isn't anything special, but it just feels like a classic Ratchet & Clank level since there's multiple different paths for you to explore, with one of those paths leading to the charge boost we've returned from the previous game. I wonder if this planet was named after a certain character from another popular 3D platformer series.
Planet Dax.
Obani Draco is a very short level, perhaps the most linear of them of all, but it makes up for it with some very gorgeous visuals and its cool boss fight against Courtney Gears. Since this game takes place in a Solana galaxy, that means you get to return to some of the planets you explored in the first game, such as Veldin, Metropolis, Iridia, and Blackwater City. It's so cool revisiting these planets, even if 2 of them are glorified set pieces for these battle missions. The Starship Phoenix acts as the main hub world this time around. It's a place you can come to in between levels to buy armor, test out weapons, participate in VR training, and play some of Qwark's vid comics. You can also customize Ratchet & Clank's ship here, but there's really no point in doing that since all upgrades are purely cosmetic and space combat challenges have been cut entirely, unfortunately. But there's still plenty to do outside of the main levels, such as the previously mentioned battle missions, where you participate in a set of missions in order to defend planets from being invaded by the Tyrannoids. These can get a bit repetitive, but they offer some really cool rewards, such as the gravity boots and Map-O-Matic. Collecting sewer crystals on planet Aquados is something else you can do in between levels and can help you earn some extra votes. But I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you want to 100% complete the game, because collecting sewer crystals is a very slow and boring process, and running around in a series of different sewers for hours at a time starts to make me feel a bit claustrophobic. Luckily, a battle arena returns in the form of Annihilation Nation. On a surface level, Annihilation Nation may not look like anything new when comparing it to the gladiator arenas from Gone Commando, but it does a lot of things right in order to distinguish itself from that. It offers a lot more challenges of varying levels of difficulty, whether it be navigating a very deadly obstacle course, fighting off enemies as your weapons get randomly switched, or surviving 100 rounds. Annihilation Nation is this game's biggest highlight in my opinion, because you're guaranteed to get hours upon hours of non-stop fun playing through various kinds of tough challenges that reward you handsomely. And as I said in my retrospective for Gone Commando, participating in these kind of gladiator arenas is the best and quickest way to level up your weapons. The story of Up Your Arsenal is a big step up from the previous game in my opinion. It's fun, very action-packed, and has some of the series' most funniest and memorable moments yet. And speaking of memorable, the people that join you on your journey are great as well. There's Sasha, the captain of the Starship Phoenix and Ratchet's love interest, Al, the vid comic nerd and tech genius, Helga, the ship's very pushy training officer, Skidman Marks, the so-called Black Ops specialist, and Captain Qwark along with his friend and sidekick, Scrunch the monkey. It's really nice seeing some of these characters return, especially Skid. Dude went from this really cool guy that Ratchet admired to this buffoon he just puts up with. And he's always bragging about how he has nerves of steel, yet is the first one to run and hide whenever things pop off. Dr. Nefarious and his butler Lawrence are also great additions as well. Dr. Nefarious's demeanor is so over the top that you can't help but not take him seriously, and Lawrence compliments him in so many ways because of his indifference towards his boss' crazy antics. I also really like the early 2000s pop culture parody tone this game has, with characters such as the president of the Solana Galaxy and Courtney Gears being this game's version of Bill Clinton and Britney Spears. And the guy who directs the Secret Agent Clank series that Clank himself stars in always reminds me of George Lucas for some reason. Wait a minute, something just came to mind. Is Annihilation Nation this game's version of Fear Factor? I mean, the premise of it in Annihilation Nation is very similar. Place contestants in these dangerous environments where they have to compete in all sorts of crazy challenges. I don't know, this is probably a bit of a stretch, but it is somewhat plausible seeing as Fear Factor was still really popular around the same time of this game's release. If I were to say anything negative about the story, it'll probably be the way that Captain Qwark is portrayed. In the previous 2 games, Qwark had bad and downright questionable character traits, but was very charismatic and had a very unique sense of humor that made him feel like more than just a generic bad guy. He still retains that for the most part this time around, but is at his absolute lowest here as a character. After the Protopet incident from the previous game, he disappeared and went into hiding. That is until Ratchet and Clank finds him all disheveled and suffering from amnesia. After he regains his memories, he forms a Q Force, and you think as the leader he'd be a bit more upstanding and not to mention selfless, right? No. He sends Ratchet and Clank out on these really dangerous missions while he sits around and does nothing and then takes all the credit for their hard work. Later on in the story, he along with Ratchet and Clank go aboard the Leviathan to confront Dr. Nefarious. But it turns out that it was a trap, with the Leviathan been set to self-destruct. Qwark stays behind to get something important, but Ratchet and Clank have no choice but to leave him behind as the ship blows up. This would have been a really sad, but somewhat redeeming way for Qwark to go out. But no, it's eventually revealed that he faked his death and is hiding somewhere on a faraway planet. He's basically given up in the fight against Dr. Nefarious and doesn't care if he succeeds in turning every living being in the galaxy into robots. And to make things worse, Qwark is part of the reason why Dr. Nefarious is doing what he's doing. All throughout the game, you'll collect these Viet comics that you can play, which kind of act as an interactive biopic of sorts, as they show off a lot of Qwark's past life, specifically when it comes to his feud with Dr. Nefarious. The reason that Nefarious hates Qwark and other organic beings, or squishies as he calls them, is because he was always bullied growing up and got into a fight with Qwark that led to him becoming a robot. I always find it crazy how Qwark just walks off like he ain't just killed someone, and I can't help but roll my eyes whenever he tries to paint himself as the good guy in certain situations like this. But hey, maybe I'm looking too deep into all of this because it seems like no one else feels or thinks the same way I do. Maybe because he kinda redeems himself at the end by helping Ratchet and Clank fight against Nefarious, thus completing his character arc in a way, I guess. All in all, the story is pretty decent, much better than the previous game, no doubt. I think the reason for that is because Insomniac actually hired a real writer this time around, as opposed to having a bunch of animators and programmers make up parts of the story on the fly, and it really shows. As beloved as this game is, there is a small minority of players that view it as not a bad game, but a disappointing one that fails to live up to the high expectations that the previous 2 created, and I can understand why some will feel that way. Some of the weapons feel kind of lame and uninspired, the levels are super linear, and some cool activities that were in the previous games such as space combat and racing were cut out entirely this time around, and that certainly makes Up Your Arsenal feel quite rushed in some aspects. This may be nostalgia speaking, but even though Up Your Arsenal is obviously lacking in some areas that the previous 2 games did much better, I still think it retains most of what made them great to begin with and caps off the trilogy on a high note, and it's my personal favorite game in the entire series. Probably because it's the one I played the most, and I remember spending countless hours earning bolts in Annihilation Nation so that I could buy the Infernox armor. And this is an unpopular opinion, but I think the PS2 trilogy of Ratchet & Clank games is one of the greatest trilogies in all of gaming. Each and every single one of these games improves upon each other in so many interesting and unique ways, and it's been such a blast replaying and reviewing these for you guys. But for now, I'm going to take a break from these games and favor playing others for my new very speedy Retrospective series that you should totally check out. So yeah, as always, this has been your boy Speedy, and I look forward to catching you guys in the next video. Peace.
What do you mean we can't teleport to a planet?
I'm afraid we're well out of range, sir. Perhaps if you had bothered to specify a destination.
When will we be in range?
Oh, I'm sure something will come along in, say, 5 or 10,000 years.
Ah! I don't believe this! Now what?
I don't suppose you can play drums.
Ah!